Welcome to Leadership Lift. This evening we're in conversation with Greg Wooldridge and Joe Klinehamer, and our guide is Craig James. Tonight's evening is being recorded. We want to send out a very special thank you to Margaret Wong for her gracious and generous support for this evening's program. And mostly we want to thank you.
Who are we talking about here? Greg Wooldridge. Now, here's a guy who's led the Blue Angels, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And that doesn't happen by magic. You don't just like fill out an app. You get selected by your team and the team and pilots because they want you to lead again and again. Only guy to do it. And here's the thing. When you think about the Blue Angels, you certainly think about performance. You think about discipline. You think about practice. All those things apply. But what I learned in getting to know Greg and having the great honor to get to know Greg is that it's the human stuff. It's this soft stuff that's the hard stuff. It's the love. It's the empathy. It's the connection that you have with your fellow pilot, team member, co-leader, whether in a company or otherwise. So boss joins us. Greg, glad to be here. And we'll probably hear a thing or two about what glad to be here means. Joe Klinehamer, an executive of aviation, aerospace, and defense. What's so cool about this is we've learned in our conversations prepping for this chat with y'all that from boardroom to cockpit, or they call it the canopy. When the canopy's down, it's focus time. When the boardroom door closes, it's ready to go, and we have a task at hand. And Joe also has learned that leading with love and empathy is not just family, not just personal, but in the boardroom and in the office, whether scientist, pilot, aviator, all this stuff, the human stuff matters. And you're all here because many of you, we have a privilege to know. And well, that's why we wanted to make sure, if you could, that you'd be here. Rob Stone worked with Greg now X number of years ago, 1990 something, when Greg led the Blues and did a little video. It's called Around the World at the Speed of Sound. It's a great documentary about Greg and his team taking the Blues across the country and across the world, including Russia. It's a fabulous documentary. And you're going to see 2 parts. 30 seconds from that documentary. And then it's the real stuff, don't get me wrong. But then 30 seconds of the real show from inside the cockpit, inside the canopy. And that'll tee everything up to start our conversation with Greg and Joe. Sue, roll the tape.
How about that? Welcome, everybody. I am glad to be here. You can imagine after flying like that, you'd have to be glad to be here, right? But that was actually part of the foundation of our culture, was a sense of gratitude for what we got to do, the people we got to work with, especially. The teams were incredible. So you saw those videos, and guess how far apart we were. You probably get a lot of answers there. But toward the end, that was as close as we could safely get it. And we were about 18 inches apart. The reason I like to show that is because it really builds on the issue of trust. Trust was the keynote of how we got our work done and how it was created. And through this wonderful meetup here with all of you, we're going to talk about trust and what it meant to us in the Blue Angels, what it means to me, and how that plays into this culture of excellence. So we had a culture of excellence and a culture of caring, with a center point of safety and being ambassadors of goodwill. So with that, that's an intro to what you've seen there, and maybe a kind of a foundation for where we're going to go today. So I'm glad to be here. That was a motto of ours, and you'll understand it more richly, I'd say, by the end of the hour and a half. So thanks, CJ. Thanks, everybody.
Greg, thanks. Glad to be here. Joe, welcome.
Thank you. So, this is a very interesting scenario, folks, for me, because this is my first webinar experience at this end of the webinar. And who do I end up beside? The 3-time leader of the Blue Angels, a legendary guy. So, so a little bit like the difference between LeBron James and the high school basketball star, and I'm not even sure I can meet that standard. But what's been very interesting is Greg and I have been sharing experience and leadership. You mentioned already the core of trust and how important it is. And you all know you all understand it's important. But one of the concepts that I wanted to share, and hopefully we can have some discussion on it tonight, is the speed of trust. And we've just seen remarkable speed in an aircraft, but I've found over more decades than I'd like to admit that in order to get a project or a team or a company moving at high velocity, a velocity even beyond what might be expected, and it includes even at lower cost, because usually when you can move faster in a business, you're operating at a lower cost. So let's examine that together tonight as we share notes about what's been your experience with. Can you move faster? You find you can move faster in getting things done when you're in a trust relationship with whether it's somebody in your personal life or here. Certainly my experience is mostly with complex projects inside of aerospace and defense companies. So back to you, Craig.
Thank you, Joe. Great to have you here. Let me just double check. I'm unmuted. That's good. One of the things that, again, we're saying is that this is a conversation tonight. And there's a concept that Greg will share, I'm sure, in the blues and in aviation. There's a thing called a wingman or wingwoman who's got your back, got your side. You're all in it together, no matter what rank or role. And tonight we're all in a conversation, leading this conversation. So this is the tricky part as a moderator. So if we've got 30, 40, 50 people and everyone spends 10 minutes, we'll get through introductions in about 3 hours. So that's a little tricky. We won't do that, but we're going to ask and invite. If you don't feel comfortable, that's cool. But if you have a handle, if you want to introduce, just say, hi, I am. If you have your call sign or your name, that'd be great. And if there's a takeaway you'd like tonight, what would that be? No particular order. Feel inspired. If you're like, hi, my handle, my call sign is, my name is, my takeaway tonight is, ready, set, go. Who feels comfortable?
I'm Cameron Orlean. I would say my takeaway is I'd really like to learn more about how your teams were able to trust each other on the fly like that. If your team makes a mistake, it could be fatal. If my team makes a mistake, it's dollars out the door. So it's really interesting to me to understand how you guys were able to bring that together.
Thanks, Cameron. Welcome. Craig Lucas, I'm going to put you on the spot because you're so articulate. You know how to say
More than happy
things.
to be put on the spot. Thanks, Craig. My name is Craig Lucas. I'm founder of a company by the name of Authentica, and we have built a global platform for human potential activation. And Craig, thanks for inviting me to participate. The one thing I'd like to know from Greg and Joe is, was the trust earned over time, or did you lead with trust?
Well, that's a great question. Oh, I guess we can we respond, Greg, or have to wait for everybody to.
If you're okay with this, if everyone's okay, like we said, we're going to go with the flow, and it's going to be an organic thing. So that said, if everyone's voice could be heard, and we take notes, and then we talk free flow. So we're just going to go around the room.
I'll get back to you on that, Craig.
I'd love to know now.
All right, let's go. We can go.
You can wait.
All right.
Well, it's a great question. I mean, the building of trust to me starts with authenticity, which Seth Godin makes fun of. He says everybody's talking about authenticity now, and what you really want to talk about is humanity. But it gets down to being able to when I walk in the door, recognize that I'm a human being and all the people that work for me and with me are human beings. And so it starts with the idea of respect, really, for the fact that we are equal on that basis. We are all human beings. We all have issues going on. We all have challenges. But when it comes to interacting, then my own experience is I start with an assumption of trust. So for example, if I were working with you, Craig, or whoever else was at Cameron was bringing this topic up, I would start by trusting you. But guess what I would also want to do? I would want to verify, right, that you're trustworthy. So I think it gets down to investing, you could say naively, trust in the people that you're working with, and then discovering whether or not that the loop develops where the trustworthiness is developing from it. So that's one observation I would make. Greg, do you want to build on that at all?
Sure, you betcha. We start out with trust. The culture of the Blue Angels is built on trust. So when we get to the team, the way we operate, the way we function is fully transparent, and that starts the trust process. And I like to look at the 4 C's of trust. The first one is competence. We make an assumption that whoever we're flying with and whoever's repairing our airplanes, so I don't want to forget about that. You know, we're the lightning out there, but as George Will said, there's thunder behind that lightning, and it's the 100 or so other folks that give us the ability to fly those jets. So we make an assumption that there's trust. We build that on the first C of the 4 C's, competence. We make an assumption, especially on the Blues, but you can't always assume it. You develop it, you feel it. Is there competence in what that person does, right? That starts it going. Character, what's their character like? Trustworthy? Are they honest when they don't have to be? You know, when nobody's looking, that sort of thing. What is their character like? What is their approach to persistence and getting something done? So that brings in commitment. So we've got competence, character, now commitment. Are they as committed to what we're trying to do as a team, or across the aisle working with a client? You know, are they sensing the commitment that you have to helping them, right? Do they sense that you're of great character? Do they sense that you're competent in what you do? And the 4 C is consistency. Are you consistent? And that doesn't mean the same decision all the time. It refers back to the values you use to make a decision and to deal with others. So we come into that teamwork, that organization, with an anticipation that we can trust each and every team member. And then we leave it. We build on it. We build on it with the transparency and I'll say it. I'll use the L word, and the love we develop for each other, right? It's there, even in a military organization. It's, you know, brothers and sisters that we're going to take care of no matter what happens. And as a leader, you have to engender that throughout the organization, and you do it by your own trust in the people you work with and learning them so well.
The inculcation of trust as an integral element of the culture that you establish as the leader of an organization is so crucial. Unfortunately, well, not really unfortunately, but a reality of what Greg is talking about, you're going through those 4 tick marks for every person you're working with in the organization as the leader. What happens when you can't fill out one of those tick marks? I mean, I'll just throw that out. What do you think happens in an organization?
Coaching, mentoring, putting your arm around somebody, say, hey, let's talk about this a bit. Where do you stand here, and how are we doing? And sometimes I'm feeling we're getting there. Let's see how you're thinking about it.
Yeah, where I was going to go with this is that sometimes you don't get there with people. You can't quite establish the trust because the person is not what? Trustworthy, right? So
yeah, I mean, what's
have,
interesting.
Go ahead, Craig.
What I was going to say, Joe, is that what's being captured here, thanks to Cameron's and Craig's question, And then Joe, you're suggesting that we have a conversation. Let's keep the flow going. I think we've captured the fact that there's the consciousness of trust origin. Where does it begin and what makes it flow from where to whom? And then the idea of Cameron's, how do you deal with that on the fly when you're talking about fatality? This is, serious business up in the air. I'd like to move us forward to interlace the conversation with the intro part. Anyone else have a quick hello, their handle? Wilson, I think you've got something, your hopeful takeaway tonight.
Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to join this conversation, and nice to see everyone. Thanks, Greg and Joe, for your wonderful comments. I'm a musician. I'm an orchestra conductor, and when I listen to this conversation, there are just so many similarities between a symphonic orchestra, being an orchestra conductor, what happened during music making, during performance, live performance, with the same job that you're doing in the air. When things can go really minute or millimeter can go wrong and fatalities can happen. So we have been talking for the last 15 minutes about the element of trust, the element of teamwork, the element of really leadership, but at the same time having all elements work together. Because you guys, when you are pilots, you're practicing and you're trying to perfect all technique until everything is possible to have all the perfection. Same thing with a music rehearsal, whether it's a small group chamber music of 4 people or a large orchestra of 100 people or a chamber orchestra of 40 people. We rehearse, but at the end of the day, during the performance, anything can happen, because we have our heart, our mind, and the adrenaline. When things get exciting, at that split moment, decision has to be taken in a matter of millimeter second.
So we're talking about fatal consequence, source of trust. We're talking about perfection, precision, and sort of being across time and moments of time, past, present, future. There's a lot there. I wonder, gents, Joe, Greg, how when we're talking about this very specific perfection, precision, and fatal consequence, trust kind of feels, well, that sounds a little bit loosey-goosey and soft. How do we take these really hard and fast things and reconcile them with things like love and trust?
Well, what I would say about, hey, Greg, you broke the ice. You used the love word first. But one of the things I want to leave with those of you listening tonight is the love. I'm not that comfortable. In fact, when we were practicing for this thing, and discussing it, just talking about love in a business setting was difficult for me. Not because I don't believe it's important and real. It's just not normally in the rhetoric of management or leadership conversation. But the more I think about it, empathy is so important in being able to lead teams and be a part of a team and get a successful result. Putting yourself in the other, we all sort of know what it is, putting yourself in the other person's place. But I think there's a whole spectrum of extents to which you can put yourself in the other person's place. And I think if you can go about it mechanically and just say, oh yeah, I know your mother passed away. I remember when my mother passed away, and you say a few things and you go on down the hall and talk to the next person. Or you can follow the principle of loving that person in the sense of really empathizing with where they are and doing something substantive to let them know that you care. It's difficult to talk about how it works, but it's one of those things that you at some point register on the Richter scale of the other person, and they know that you're real, and they know that you care. They know that you may even feel helpless, that you can't do more, but you connect in that moment. And I think that it's very difficult to do that at a perfection level if you're not really feeling love for the people that you work with. So it gets down to how do we define love, and maybe somebody else ought to do that, but it certainly has to do with caring about somebody and doing for that person what you wouldn't do necessarily for anyone. So the people in your team, in Greg's case, it's life and death. And in the case of running the ordinary businesses like some of us run, it's not life and death in terms of physical life and death, but the well-being of the business rests upon how well you as the leader can put yourself in the position of the other person. And
Joe, thank you
inspire them.
for that explanation. And Greg, probably you have a thing or two to say about precision and performance and how's it reconcile with the softer stuff. I had a meeting with a fellow not too long ago. He said, he's in the business of negotiation. That sounds very transactional. He said, actually, I'm in the business of having the courage to have the difficult conversations. That's when humans figure out how to come together and figure something out. It goes to that uncomfortable place. And how do we make it safe to go to the uncomfortable place without becoming instantly polarizing? So Dave, your courage to always ask the big questions and have the uncomfortable conversations where it begins. I think that's part of the answer. Leo, I think I might see a hand from you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Leo Zimmerman. My feeling is that this is all connected, and that it's all about the story we've been taught and the story that we're telling ourselves today. I've come to believe, and the more I've learned about American history, that from the very beginning, our country was founded in an energy of chaos. It absolutely was. And there have been many times where the fact that it was able to go forward was quite extraordinary. And I think if you're of my generation, I've had the privilege of living through a period where there was at least the perception of things being held together that worked, but was really suppressing a lot of negativity and problems underneath. And keep in mind that I love our country very much. And I think being honest about its history is important too, so that as we celebrate its greatness, we also get real about things that really weren't right from the very beginning. And I think that that's really what the truth is. I think that that's where my integrity is in this moment, is feeling the need to name that. That doesn't lessen anything that's great about our country, all the many things that are great about our country. I'm certainly not looking to go live anywhere else. And I can do a whole presentation to you on the way my own family has benefited from the generations they've been in this country. At the same time, I can hold that and also be honest about the shadow and the darkness, and be present for both and process both. And for me, that's a way forward in any conversation. And I think it's also a way forward to translate this inside an organization in terms of how the people relate to each other. What is really going on? There's what's up here, and then there's often something else underneath here. How are we all really doing that?
Leo, you always have such a beautiful way to explain things, and it stems from what Dave was saying. Is if we lost something, how do we get it back? I wonder, Greg or Joe, if you can think of an instance or a time, Greg, where trust was lost, but you got it back, and you didn't have time to have maybe a big deliberation because it's unforgiving. Fatality is the outcome if things aren't working. Is there a way or a story where you were able to quickly bring trust back, or once it's lost, how do you get it back? Do you have a story?
Well, I would say, CJ, that in the blues, one of the secret sauce to our spiraling up a performance, of getting better and recognizing what was going on, was the way we debriefed what we had just accomplished. Be like Boss Wilson there. Hey, boss, leading the orchestra and hearing that off note, or whatever you would call it in your world. And then when you come back together at the end, what we did on the Blue Angels, we admitted, I went in the room as a senior guy, as the boss, right? Hung my rank on the door, if you will. And we went in there on equal stead, each and every one of us. And I would talk about what had just happened in that either practice or air show. And they're all flown and analyzed the same way, whether it's a practice or an air show, because safety is at the head of the line there. And I would say what I had done wrong, how I could have done better, and how I'll fix my mistakes. And that was the secret sauce. That's the way we operated. And each person in the room that had participated gets to say something about how their performance was and what they saw. And we saw each other so closely that we never missed an error. Now, and we expected the wingmen or whomever made the mistake to be forthright and transparent and take accountability, take responsibility, and be accountable for what had happened and promise to fix it. That promise, I'll fix it, was huge. And so we never really left that room except on 2 occasions in all the years I led the team, when somebody had done something that was obvious to more people in the formation or in the event and didn't fess up to it. And it was significant, only twice. And as the leader, I had to say, well, and I said his call sign. I said, well, what about this? What happened on that? He said, oh yeah, it wasn't all that big a deal. And I said, well, safety is always a big deal. Any error out there that could cause problems with the formation and the air show is a big deal. And that's the way we approached it. So what did I do? I got together with that gent after the debrief, took him aside and said, look, and again, express it in a loving way, but in a serious way, that we've got to do better than that. We can't hold back, or we're going to put a niche, a ding, a fracture in the trust that we enjoy, we relish on the team. Everybody wants to do their absolute best. You talked about somebody in the percussion or whatever missed a note in one of your events, Wilson, and everybody wants to do their best, and we saw that when we flew. And when they don't, more often than not, somebody would sense it or see it during the event, like you heard something, your great ear, you probably heard right away, but you make the assumption they're trying to do their best, and they're probably feeling pretty lousy. And what we tried to do in the Blue Angels was, if somebody was feeling lousy and starting to get a little bit down about their performance, we picked them up during the performance. And for me, it was to elevate the tone of my voice, because it was all about cadence and what was coming up next, how we're going to maneuver the airplanes. So they maneuvered without seeing a plane in front of them move. They would start moving based on the trust and the cadence. So what I would do is elevate my voice, elevate the tone a little bit. Come on, put that behind you. We got another 25 minutes of air show here. We want you, I didn't have to say all that. It's just the elevation of the voice. And then in the debrief, we would mentor and coach and see what happened, and we'd get it done. But going back to, what do you do when you have a breakdown? You have to get with the person where that trust has been diminished and start reestablishing it.
At the core, so the core theme of this gathering is leadership lift, and it's kind of easy to understand in Greg's territory what lift is all about, because you see the planes flying around. And Greg and I have compared notes about the difference in trying to create leadership lift, so to speak, in a setting where you're in a high performance aircraft with, if you will, a lot of excitement, high risk, a lot of immediate adulation that goes along with the risk, and how different it is for somebody like me, who goes into the doorway of a building in the morning. I might, we have Cuyahoga County Airport right next to us, so I might hear a jet taking off or landing, but that's as close as I get to that excitement. So then what do you do when you walk in the building and you want to impart leadership lift to people? So I think in Leo's scenario, in what the other gentleman it raised, is my answer to what to do about the dismal situation that we saw in the capital account or other things that are sort of discouraging is, what's the phrase that this phrase that was it?
Be the change you want to see.
Yeah, that's it. Be the change you want to see. My mission in walking into the building is to approach every one of the people that I deal with authentically. We've sort of touched on that, try to induce trust in them. But I see all of them as consisting of soul, body, mind, and spirit. So each person, of course, has soul, body, mind, spirit, and the collective enterprise has a soul, body, and mind, and spirit. And what I mean by that is soul is the part of the person who judges right and wrong. So if you're the leader, you're subservient to 18 or 20 or however many direct reports you have, their judgments of you on whether you're being fair, whether you're operating correctly, and all those kinds of things. Body is a little easier to understand. So if you want to work on that aspect of your employees, you keep the heating, ventilating, and air conditioning system working well, and you have a comfortable office space and all those kinds of things. You even, in our era now, we have more opportunity to leverage ideas about wellness. So that's the body part. The mind it's got to be an organizational emphasis where you encourage education, and the spirit kind of becomes the collective piece of all of that. So for the leader to raise the whole enterprise, he or she needs to focus on those aspects of themselves. So if I go in the door in the morning happy and positive, then I have a chance to impart that to the organization. So,
first of all, this is such a wonderful conversation. I love it. I love convergent viewpoints and divergent viewpoints. And I always view those that are divergent as an opportunity to kind of lean in and maybe seek more understanding. The point I wanted to surface was that what I think could be kind of an underlying or an underpinning concept, which is that of energy. I think that comes into play and explains a lot of what we've talked about. It explains a lot of what happens in flight, what happens in organizations, what happens in human-to-human interactions. And it's an exciting time because science is bringing so much to the forefront these days. A lot of it doesn't make it into the mainstream news because it may not be fun. I find it extremely interesting, and I read a lot of scientific studies in my free time. But I think the energy of intention and the energy of attention helps direct our action. And that can explain the incident at the Capitol. And if we lose control of what our intention is, or lose sight of that, and then we place our attention in another direction and then act, I guess in a group setting, that can be contagious. And I mean, we literally have energetic fields around us. That's been known for decades. Our heart doing ECGs and EKGs, showing what kind of wave activity we have. We interact with other humans that way. Many people don't know it, but we do. When you feel someone in your personal space, like they're too close to me, they're not touching me though. That is exactly what's in play when you're in flight and you're like a flock of birds. It's the same thing. It's mirror neurons. It's our intention, our attention, and then our action. And
So
that's it.
intention, attention, energy, and actions. Boy, if I were taking notes, I am taking notes. I would write those 4 words down and remember them. They sound like they're siblings. And Greg, I saw a couple times you graciously were like, about to say something, and I'd like to open the window for you to do just that right now.
Thank you, Marissa. Great comments about energy. And we came into our flights with incredible energy. We've got each other focused in our briefing. And I would state exactly what we're going to do in the maneuver and with the same cadence. So cadence and consistency were right there. And everybody would get focused in the briefing. And then when we went to fly the show or the practice, that's when the execution came in with that focus as an individual, but focus as a group. And we had incredible intention of making it perfect. And there was never a perfect event. We just never could get there. But people wanted to do the right thing. It was choreographed, as Wilson would say, probably. And we were out there to realize a purpose larger than ourselves. The purpose was what the Blue Angels stood for and flying that air show safely and giving an example for young people to get a look of hope and dreams in their eyes and in their heads. So our intention was to do this perfectly and to put on an impressive show, but do it safely. So, the energy was there, but we knew we would be able to account for what had happened when we went to debrief. And then from the debrief, we elevated our beliefs in what we were doing to do it better the next time. So it's all about how we ran this continuous improvement cycle.
I see in human beings an enormous potential that is spirit activated. And that's I think the pathway to release the incredible amount of energy that's in any one of us. And certainly I look at the team members that I work with, and I see that almost with frustration that I'm not always able to get the full energy out of those team members, but doesn't keep me from trying. I think let's talk about nuclear. I have a background many years ago in the nuclear Navy and atomic energy and nuclear power and all that sort of stuff. And so the quantum side of it is teeny little bit of material, enormous amount of power that can be released by my good friend, well, not really, Mr. Einstein figured this out, that small can be great if we can figure out how to release it. And so the way I look at high-spirited, high-performing teams and human potential is it's there. And especially if you've recruited really highly capable, well-educated, motivated people, the potential is almost limitless. But how do you get that energy out of people? And you do it by focusing, and the kinds of companies and teams that I have experience with, you focus on the BHAGs, the big, hairy, audacious goals, the things you want to get done with the organization. And that's part of it. So the aspirational side of it, the vision side of it, that's kind of the leader's role. But the other piece is you've got people that are working along a career profession. So when you can get the magic right of optimizing soul, body, mind, spirit aspects of an enterprise, people have the opportunity to move at high velocity through their careers and enjoy the fruits of that career mobility, while at the same time, as the conductor of the organization, you get to take that group of people toward unusual achievements. It's just really exciting stuff that it all ties back to the power that's locked up in people, and especially in the spirit of people. And when you can click that thing on and get it going, I suppose there is an end to it, because after all, we're human, but there's almost no end to it. It's all about energy, Marissa.
We talked about energy and propulsion of it, little things having a big impact. And a friend, Jonathan Hollifield, we talked, Greg and Joe, about the idea of a trim tab. Of course, as aviators, you know what a trim tab is, and the trim tab is the little rudder that moves the bigger rudder that moves the ship. and a big ship's tough to move. But if you can get high leverage where that one thing turns to the next that makes big change, maybe this is something that we could all strive for from this chat. If we're to think about takeaways again, part of it is, what can I do? What can be done? I can't solve the nation's strife and conflict, or man, I just, it's overwhelming. But maybe there's these little things, these little atomic energy sources where tomorrow at first thing in the morning we can do. And I wonder if anyone else would like to chime in on some practical things that you've done that you think start that trim tab that turns the rudder, that turns the ship. And there's some folks maybe that have a chance to say hello. I'm doing a quick time check that we already will be done with our conversation in about 20 minutes. We'll start wrapping up and closing in about 20 minutes. So we're still in introduction and conversation mode. Anyone else like to say hey?
I would like to chime in. Can I chime in?
Christopher, please do.
As an architect, I work with a lot of people, and our job is really to take people that don't know how to agree and get them to have a conversation without them knowing it, really kind of have a vigorous conversation, and then they come to know it, and then find a direction, and then move somewhere and get to some conclusion. And I have found, the thing that I've been thinking of through everyone's discussion is one of mutual respect. That as we deal with people that we don't agree with, we can still respect them as humans, and we can still respect their opinion. That doesn't mean that we will ever agree, but it means that we acknowledge that they have an opinion. And when I think I've been able to work abroad, I worked in Dubai for a little over a year. And that a lot of stories about Dubai, but one interesting thing about it from an interpersonal standpoint is no one really was from there. Everyone you worked with was from somewhere else on the planet, which meant that when you would meet professionally and you would be kind of antagonistic in terms of roles, you would play the roles and you'd play it strongly, and then you would recognize the strength of someone, and they were doing what they needed to, and it was just work. And people were not invested in it from a personal validation standpoint. They were just trying to do their work. And then they became good friends, even though in a meeting, people would go, "You really like that person? Because you're like going at it." I'm like, "No, we're just doing what we need to do." But together, you recognize when people see one another who are awake and want to get work done. And I find that those people find one another when there's an opportunity to do that. And then you can move forward. You also recognize when someone's not really aware and only kind of following an agenda, and I just tend to not waste time with those people.
Joanna Nelson, Dr. Joanna Nelson comes to mind as in my eyesight, and here's why. Your comment, Christopher, talks about in Dubai, everyone's from a different perspective, and Joanna's in the world of bridging. So she's a scientist, and a scientist of our planet, of land and sea, and has the arduous task of translating, bridging, and communicating how this gets translated from scientific to human, and dealing with humans, and in particular indigenous populations here in the United States on the West Coast of California. And you talk about a translation, different mode of thought, right, left brain, different language, different customs, different culture. So I'm really putting you on the spot, Joanne. I wonder if you'd have anything to share with us about how we can bridge when everyone's looking from different perspectives.
Thank you. I'm happy to be on the spot. And yeah, I just got to have some of this conversation this morning, West Coast time. I'm interested in what Christopher just said about bringing somebody forward, and all of a sudden they take more team responsibility. And for me, in my translations, it's just, sometimes it's looking at lines that are never going to touch, right? And looking at, okay, unless this understanding of how to stewardship the earth gets translated into the California Environmental Quality Act, nobody's going to hear it, right? Even though they should just listen to it, but unless it fits into the receiving agency policy form, it's not going to get recorded, it's not going to get registered, and being able to do that translation and then being able to have, have a bridge go two ways of like, let's look at what it means to people to be in relationship to medicinal plants and want to make sure the water's clean enough to plant them, to replant them. Being in somebody else's shoes, right? That looking at it from somebody else's perspective and saying, yeah, just that difference and that willingness to, okay, those lines may never cross, but you don't throw up your hands and say, oh, we're never going to touch, we're never going to meet, we're never going to find each other or have the same conversation.
Greg, did you find, when I think about translation and different groups having to communicate, speaking a different language, being in Dubai and everyone's looking from a different lens, one could perhaps in error think about the blues. Well, that's all precision. You guys all do the same thing. You all think the same way. You all speak the same language. Yeah, every once in a while, maybe we make a mistake or two, and through safeties, we get honest about that. It would, let us on the inside. Is there some stuff that isn't so synchronous in the blues or in our perception of the military, where there's more different perspectives in that bubble than we might think?
Yeah, sure there is, Craig. There were a couple times when people didn't want to fly an air show with the conditions we were facing. Usually it was the weather. I know we flew one in England one time, and about half the pilots didn't want to fly. And I did, and John Foley did, one of my wingmen and another guy. So it was a 50-50 split on how we were going to get this done. So there's conflict right there. And some of them were fearing for their safety. And we had to come in and reassure them that we have all the techniques to make this safe. So, we encountered that. And then we went to, and we did go flying, and it worked out fine. But I had to assume responsibility for that action. We went to Russia, and of course, we didn't speak Russian, and the flight rules changed, and we dealt with the Russian Knights, the Russian team, the aerobatic team, and we saw how different their procedures were. Their leadership was pound the fist on the desk, and get it, make your folks comply and live in fear. Ours was nothing like that. It was living with the love for what we were doing, the glad to be here, the gratitude for what we got to do. So I don't know if that answered your question. I did kind of want to go back to Christopher for a second, though. Being an architect, as you build and make things, as you design things, you look at, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you look at function first, and then you create the form. When we're leading people, we look at the form. What is that person made up of? What are their loves? What are their passions? What are their fears? What is their family like? We look at the form, and then we can kind of help guide them in the function, what they're going to do with those talents and those skills, and at the same time replenishing or nurturing those that may not be the skills that we needed. So there's a bunch of great ideas today. This is fantastic.
I think it's very important for an organization like ours. We design and build and ship products all around the world to look as much to our customers like they are as possible. So over time, we've populated our workforce with people from China, people from India, people from Russia, people from other countries that are either were natural citizens of the United States or immigrants. And it's so important, not just for women and men to be integrated into organizations, but also as many possible ethnic groups as possible, as make any sense for the business, because it helps the organization to think like the customer, to act like the customer, and certainly this ability of connecting is a lot better when the face of your company looks like the face of your customers.
Yeah, I'd like to interject where we're hitting a lot of topics today for sure, from diversity to leadership to governance to civil unrest, to energy to atomic power to trust to perfection to precision, love, lifting others. Boy, talk about covering some bases in a short period of time. I'd like to surface yet another concept and question. And David Nash, from your original comment around it, how do we lose the trust? Here's what happened. How do we get it back? One of the things that struck me as I was listening to you in the ensuing conversation was that sometimes maybe we lose our way because we're pointed in different directions. And I wonder if part of the answer, and I don't think there's any easy answer, if part of the answer is having clarity of what we're shooting for and why we're doing what we're doing. And then here's another assumption, perhaps based out of ignorance, because I don't know, like say with the Blues, for example, how much mission was clear. Even if we didn't want to fly today because of the danger and the rain, it's not like we don't know what our mission is. Our mission is to have safe demonstrations that inspire, or however it's languaged. And I wonder if that kind of clarity of mission and purpose is getting lost in our country. That kind of clarity and purpose is often ambiguous within organizations. And I just like to serve that out there, since we've covered some of the deepest topics of the human experience. Let's add that mission and clarity of purpose. I wonder if anyone would like to chime in on that and see that as a topic of discussion when we talk about lifting others, because we know what we're lifting toward. And sometimes that's murky.
I have a thought, which is, and this is responding to Greg in some ways in the angels. So clarity of mission and purpose, and then this is the how. So I'm still on your topic, Craig, even as which is, there are central parts of the military that are about hierarchy, right? And there are ways to get things done. And I understand that you don't have a consensus meeting in the middle of a disaster, right? That are about hierarchy and hazing, and how to integrate, or how to reconcile that with love, or how do you get to clarity of purpose? Do you beat the edges off of people? Do you make it right? Or do you come to common understanding? And I'm not beating on the military. I'm just saying there's some pretty different ideas out there about how you get to clarity, precision, unity, purpose, doing a beautiful, excellent job of things. So that's what I think when I hear your question, Craig, and given the speakers.
So, Craig, one of the things that we talked about in preparing for this, I threw out an idea of a vision quotient, a VQ. Now, by the way, for those of you that are emotional quotient people, it's the 25th year since that book was published. If that makes you feel old, you should, because it's a quarter century since the book was originally written, and we've come all this way at talking about emotional quotient, and we all have different ideas about what it is. But I think this idea of vision quotient, and it may not be the right term, but I think a leader has to know where the organization is headed and communicate it very clearly. And I think we have different gifts in that regard. The reason I call it a vision quotient, it may not be the right term, but the idea is some people just, it's there. They know where the organization needs to go. It's crystal clear. And it's not a question, are we going to get there or not? It's a question of what? How are we going to get there? And I think that is just so important in lifting an organization, to stay on the theme, to communicate as a leader, this is where we're going, and we can get there. And it's not and so here we are, 10, 20 people. Somebody made such a great point about how different the talents of each individual is. And so the conducting of a strategy that brings people together on the foundation of a belief on the part of the leader that we not only can, but we will get there.
Yeah.
I think the strongest tool in our toolkit to achieve that, Joe, is empathy. And here's what I mean. I learned this lesson when I was working internationally in Saudi Arabia. So not unlike the Dubai experience, one time I was in a meeting and I actually looked around and there were 15 people in this meeting from different functional teams from 13 different countries. Only 2 people overlapped. We had 2 Lebanese there. Wow. And I forget, 2 Saudis. And I was the only American. And unlike a meeting where you're in an American corporation and your hometown and everybody, all your peers have similar backgrounds, nationalities, and so forth, my cultural training had told me that we had different attitudes from enculturation for everything that you can think of: priority of family over work, attitudes toward punctuality and time, how you conduct yourself in a meeting. Do you start socially at first, which the Saudis do, or do you get right to the point, which the Germans do?
Right.
And Americans are somewhere in between. And what that taught me was, I may think that I have clarity of purpose here. We're trying to build some laboratories. And I believe that my colleagues around the table have the same clarity of purpose. But each of us is looking at through the lens of our cultural upbringing, education, experience, talents, and so forth. And that's an obvious statement, but when you actually put it into practice, you have to put yourself into the shoes of the person who's having a differing point of view and kind of forget yourself, like disappear into the moment and just see through that woman or that man's point of view, because you run the very real risk in that environment of not actually appreciating that that one person who's speaking up may represent thousands and thousands of other people who have the same idea.
Well, that's a great point.
And then we would converge. It was amazing. As long as people kind of, one person would do that, other people would pick up, we would start that behavior, and we would converge to clarity no matter what our background was.
Rob, it was perfect that you chimed in. At this point, you're a critical thinker and a concrete guy. And here we are at essentially the conclusion of this program together, this conversation together, and a few minutes left for us to do a roundabout, a closing, and certainly closing comments from Joe and Greg. One thing I'm going to put out there, Marissa, is an intention statement. I don't know what the concrete thing is, because we talked a lot of concept and heart here, and especially us in the U.S., I think we go, okay, what's next? What's next? What's next? What's the action? What's the outcome? What's the output? What are we doing? What's the plan? And so that's maybe pushing on a string a little bit. Perhaps this is just what it's meant to be. That said, we're going to do our part to keep us connected here. I think this is what's missing from events like this that happen in a silo. And it's like, oh, that was great. Who was that person? I don't remember. And so we'll do that part again, unless you opt out. That's one thing we can activate. I'd like to close with anything that anyone would like to say, think, or suggest that we could do to activate, even a tiny thing, a little trim tab. So it's sort of like we're in the last lap here. Any closing thoughts, late hellos, and then we'll ask for Joe and Greg to offer a few final thoughts. And again, repeating, that's 7 Eastern, which is a few minutes away. Joe, Greg, Sue, and I'll be hanging around. And it might be the 4 of us, might be some of you too. That's totally up to you. All right, so sort of going around robin. Anyone else? Chime in, chime out, thought, question, comment.
I think we could all choose an infinite mindset as we leave this meeting.
Hey, Craig, Joe, and Greg too, just incredible job facilitating this as well. I know it's difficult to do over Zoom, and you guys are masters at it. So thank you. This made it for a really engaging night, and cheers to you guys.
Oh, thanks, Mike, Julie. So glad to have you here. Glad to be here. All right. Talk about cadence. I think the word cadence came up. Joanna, we do this all the time after our meetings, right? Quick breath. Breath in and a breath out. Maybe a thought flows from us to each other energetically. Marissa, as you said, perhaps we don't have to say a word, but we feel it. From Joe, I'll ask you to go first. Your final thoughts, words of wisdom. Thank you. Gratitude to you. As everyone knows, stuff like this takes a lot of energy and time. And you guys, Greg, Joe, you spent so much energy, took this so seriously. I'm so grateful for it. Joe?
So, leadership lift, what's it about? And I can only talk with any expertise about my own experience. I think it takes as much personal discipline as we can muster to make sure that we come to our team and the people that we lead with strong soul, which doesn't happen automatically. It's something we have to work at to keep ourselves at peace with who we are and how we behave. So the internal standard that we have, the conscience that we have, meeting that. Body, We've got to take care of ourselves and bring physical strength and energy to our leadership. Mind, we use it, overuse it, read, think, struggle to understand more and more as we go forward. And spirit, it's different for each of us, but we've got to be disciplined in building that spirit and knowing where we want to go. So personal discipline, crafting our skills. Jerry Rice, the legendary receiver of the San Francisco 49ers, one of the great wide receivers in all of the NFL's history. In practice, every time the quarterback threw him the ball, what do you think he did with it? He ran to the end zone. None of the other wide receivers in practice did that. He ran to the end zone. Why do you think he ran to the end zone every time? Because he was training his mind and everything he is, that when I get that ball in my hands, I'm going to end up in the end zone. And I think that's the kind of power that we have to bring to an organization if we expect to get exceptional results.
Joe, beautifully said. Thank you so much. Glad to be here. And boss, Greg, we're coming in for a landing. Take us home. Bring us home.
All right, cool. Hey, one thing I would say about being a leader, and that is have fun. Have fun doing it. It really has an influence on those around you. If you know, one of your primary responsibilities as a leader is to build new leaders and create a thirst in them to take your job, or at least somehow get to that kind of a level or that job. And you do that by showing them that this is rewarding. And when I say fun, I don't mean ha 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 fun. I mean, this is worth it. This is sweet. I want to get this done in the best possible way. And I'm having a good time, and I trust you. I trust the people around me. You know, Joanna mentioned building consensus. My 4 years of leading the Blue Angels was so much different from anything else I did in the military. It was democratic. It was consensus building. Okay, guys, we got a show coming up in Kokomo next week. You know, these are the obstacles. These are the things we're going to face. How are we best going to do that? And everybody had a voice. Or there was an issue about standards of conduct, gifting, or whatever. Somebody wanted to give the team gifts. And we had to talk about that. How do you guys feel about that? First of all, we weren't allowed to take gifts because we're a taxpayer-funded organization. So there was what we call standards of conduct. But you worked through all those things as a team, as a group. So you get that consensus, and then you get buy-in, and then you get ownership. So all the ownership of the event, of how it went, is felt by each and every member of the team, no matter what you did, because it took that entire team to make this work well. And so have fun with it. There's so much more to tell you about what I learned in those 4 years with the Blues and how we transformed. And we were already, you know, at the peak of performance through our culture, but how did we get everybody on board, build that consensus, that loyalty to the effort, and enjoy what we're doing and take corrective actions when things didn't go quite right. And usually it was self-induced correction. It was realizing the need for correction, and then the mentoring and the coaching that went into that one, that couldn't be possible. So, I mean, it's just, leadership is fascinating. It's changing all the time. There's talk about you were born with it or you learned it, you know, all these things about leadership. There's so much academic study of leadership, but if you can make it fun, it has a great impact on your entire team. So with that, I'm glad to be here.
Glad to be here. Joe, thank you. Greg, thank you. Sue, thank you. Everybody, thank you. And that next thing might be a continued conversation. Stay tuned. We'll stay in touch. Greg, if we were now the ground meets the wheels of our aircraft, what would you guys say at this moment? We say, hey, we landed, we're done, or some cadence.
Can't wait to debrief and analyze how this whole day went. You know, can't wait. We thirsted for that debrief because it wasn't a hammering. You went in there and it was getting to speak freely, transparently, openly. It was a safe environment. You create a safe environment from that debrief. We thirsted for that. So that was more than you asked for, CJ. Sorry, but I'll hang. Anybody else got some questions?
It's a bonus, and we're going to make the official conclusion of our event. Thank you, everybody. We're Greg and Joe and Sue and I are just going to hang around and watch it fade away, or if you stick, we'll continue to chat. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.